At this point, every information portal is saturated with mindfulness content. But this show is a unique, unusual, curious take on mindfulness. Some of what you hear will be completely new to you. Let's dive in and take a look at the nature of the aware mind. I invite you to deepen your awareness so that you may be liberated and inspired. I'm Sarah Vallely, professional coach. I help people overcome anxiety, heal from past trauma, improve their relationships, and maintain better work-life balance. Today, we are here with Brice Annabel. She is a licensed therapist. She specializes in anxiety, eating disorders, and OCD. And she also has a coaching practice that she'll tell us more about at the end of our discussion. And Brice has been on our show before. Welcome back, Brice. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. And today we are going to be talking about stress and anxiety that we experience around the holidays. First, I want to talk about the difference between stress and anxiety. A lot of times we use these words interchangeably, but are they truly interchangeable? Are there differences? One thing to think about is they are both emotional responses. Stress is typically caused by an external trigger, something going on in our world. And this stress can cause irritability, anger, fatigue, muscle pain, digestive problems, can interfere with our sleeping. Anxiety, it's similar. We consider it to be a little bit more persistent, maybe a little bit more excessive, these excessive worries that don't go away even when our stressor is gone. And the definition of stressor are those things going on in our life that cause that stress. So anxiety can be thought of as this response that we have, but even when the stressor isn't there. And it can cause insomnia, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, muscle tension, irritability. So, it can have a lot of the same symptoms as stress, but it is a little bit different. I wouldn't say this is a technically correct differentiation, but what I usually say is that stress is more mental and anxiety is more physical. We're just thinking all these stressful thoughts, these worry thoughts, and anxiety. It's like our nervous system is really triggered and we're really feeling all of these things in our body. But Brice, I'd be so curious for you when someone asks you the difference between stress and anxiety. How do you explain that to them?
The things that I find is really helpful is, and you were touching on this, to discern stressor and stress. And the stressor being that external situation or event, or a lot of times it's the accumulation of different things in our lives, sometimes happening, simultaneously, or maybe there's just one thing, but it's a big one. So we have that external event or circumstance, stress being the way that internally our nervous system and our body and our minds respond to those external circumstances or situations. And I think that's really helpful discernment between the stressor and the stress, because then that can put us in a position to be able to say, okay, what can I do with my internal stress? Anxiety certainly can come from external circumstances or situations, but not always. There might not be either a really clear external cause or maybe the worries and the anxiety response is disproportionate to the situation, right? So point being that anxiety can sometimes be connected to an external circumstance, but not always. Even if there is an external circumstance, anxiety typically lasts beyond the resolution of the stressor. Whereas with stress, typically you're going to see, like, as the stressor resolves or things get figured out, then that stress can naturally dissipate. And again, I say usually because there are always exceptions to everything. We can experience stress and anxiety in similar ways, right? Because if you think about it, like, our nervous system is activated in both situations, and our nervous system doesn't necessarily go, oh, this is stress, or oh, this is anxiety. For sure, with anxiety, a lot of times, you have those classic worries and things like that. But again, people can also feel anxiety in the absence of worried thoughts, right? As a primarily physical experience.
That's a really good point that you brought up about feeling this anxiety when there's really no external factors that explain why you're having that anxiety. That's such a hard anxiety because
Mhm.
you almost become more anxious because you don't know what's going on. Like, why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. That's hard. And that's definitely something that a lot of us experience. Just being educated on what the definition of stressor is, being
Mhm.
educated on the definition of stress, the definition of anxiety can be so helpful because otherwise it can feel very overwhelming and you don't
Yeah.
really
Mhm.
know this phenomenon that's happening. But if you have that education,
Yeah.
you can start naming and witnessing what's happening and it can sometimes take the edge off a little
Mhm.
bit because you at least know what's happening.
I completely agree. I think a lot of times being able to have a language around our experience helps us then to be able to understand it. And then, as far as mindfulness, like you said, it really allows for the labeling practice.
Some people might be curious about generalized anxiety disorder. So, if we have anxiety, we can probably be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. If we just have stress that comes and goes, then we probably wouldn't get that diagnosis. But just to be clear, generalized anxiety disorder is excessive, hard to control worry that we have most days over about 6 months' time. And the worry can jump from one topic to the other. It's not necessarily always about one certain situation in your life, and definitely comes with those physical symptoms. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Again, a kind of that hallmark of like worries that are hard to control. And certainly sometimes people have a tendency towards worrying about particular things or themes. I like to think about our thoughts, our emotions, and our body like gears that lock into one another. So when one goes, we're biologically hardwired for them to all go. The pace of our thoughts a lot of times can feel like they're moving really quickly.
Our topic today is about the holidays. Here are some situations that might cause our stress to go into overdrive or our anxiety to kick in to gear. So, depending on who you are, some of these things that can cause these discomforts have to do with not having as much control over circumstances as you normally do. And so, here
Mhm.
are some examples where things are located in your home. No, that sounds like really simple, but if you are visiting someone and you set something down, they might pick it up and put it somewhere else. If you are having company and you put something down, it might get moved and it might seem like a little thing, but it really can be stressful or cause
Mhm.
anxiety. Another one could be your bedding, your mattress. If you are traveling, you're staying in a hotel or someone else's house, you're not in your own bed. You're not with your own bedding. It really can make a
Yeah.
difference.
Mhm.
Another is how the shower works. This is for me, I go to a hotel and I'm like, this shower is not, does not have the number of little holes in the shower as mine at home. And it just throws me off. So little
Yeah.
things like that. What time you leave the house, when you're in group with your family, you have to kind of wait for the group, or the group is pushing you to leave faster than you want to. Noise levels, you're used to it being quiet in the morning, but you have company over at your house and they're putting the music on or have the TV on or something like that. And who we spend our time with. When we're not in these holiday family dynamics where you usually have a lot more control of who we're spending our time with and how much time we're spending with them. So we kind of relinquish that a little
Yeah.
bit. So those are some examples of things that might be causing you some stress or anxiety, and it's okay. It happens.
I would even think about things like when we typically exercise, how much we're engaged in conversation with people. I was just hearing the examples that you were talking about and hearing kind of a couple of threads that really kind of weave all those things together. And the first thing I was thinking was just familiarity. And just how when we're in our own home with, the people that we typically live with, Very often, and a lot of the times it's in ways that we don't even fully appreciate until it's gone or until it's different. That there is a way that our normal routines and the rhythms that we have to our lives are really regulating. And again, it's one of those things that it's operating a lot of times in ways that we're not even really totally aware of until all of a sudden we're going to somebody's house, and all those variables that we have intentionally and or unintentionally kind of created in our lives are then different. They did a really interesting research study a couple years ago looking at when people slept in different places than their normal home and bedroom. And they showed that there's a part of the brain that continues to be activated even while we're sleeping. So like in a hotel room or at another person's house, if it's not some place that we're really familiar with, our brain is activated because it's saying, oh, this is different. I need to be on guard. So just really recognizing the impact that it can have on us, especially those of us, I will include myself in that list, who really benefit from our day-to-day lives and the rhythm and the routine and that familiarity. Even like you're saying, how many holes is in the shower head, right? We can have this visceral experience of familiarity and comfort or difference. And the other thing I was also hearing too is stimulation to our nervous systems. And I think, speaking as a highly sensitive person, things like noise level, when we're with people that might be really extroverted and thrive on like talking a lot, that can start to feel overstimulating in a lot of ways. And that can look different for different people, but that can be anxiety inducing, it can be exhausting, especially for highly sensitive. Being in, more overstimulating environments can be really stressful.
I really loved what you said about the routine and how these routines in our lives help keep us regulated. That's so true for myself. I mean, I really do need simple things like I make this certain shake every morning. I drink this certain water mixed with lime and salt. So I was traveling a week or so ago and I didn't have that water drink with the salt, and it really threw me off. So it's like these routines really do regulate us. The holidays approaching, sometimes we have this anticipatory anxiety. We have anxiety about the holiday dynamics before they even happen, maybe weeks before. There's lots of reasons that we might do that in advance, but a lot of times we aren't necessarily completely conscious of what it is that's causing the anxiety to creep up. It could be there's a part of you that knows that you're not going to be in control of these things that you normally are in control of, or you're not going to be in your routine as you would normally be. It can cause this anticipatory anxiety, which for some people is almost worse than the actual anxiety at the moment. So I thought maybe we could take a couple minutes to address that anticipatory anxiety and what folks could do to be with it and understand it. And some of the thoughts I have are to be aware of your thinking. When you're in this anticipatory anxiety, what thoughts do you typically think that are kind of more specific to this anticipatory anxiety? Like these might not be thoughts that you have in a different circumstance. And so that can be helpful to connect them to this process, because then you can start telling yourself, oh, I'm just thinking those thoughts because I'm having this anticipatory anxiety, and you don't have to latch onto them as much or run with them as much. It's always good to be mindful of your body and how your body is being affected by this anticipatory anxiety. One of the reasons that can be helpful is it can kind of move us away from our thinking. We can kind of take a step away from our thinking and just kind of sit with what's going on in our body. Although I will say about 1 out of 10 times that practice can actually make it worse. For some people can increase your anxiety. So you have to check with yourself. And then the other thing that I'll mention here with what we can do with our anticipatory anxiety is notice what emotions are coming up. And that might take some moments. You might
Mhm.
not know right off the bat. All you feel is just, like this
Yeah.
anxiety, but there might be some emotions under them. They might have to do with family dynamics. They might have to do with family
Mhm.
trauma. They might have
Mhm.
to do with not feeling heard, feeling
Mhm.
misunderstood, feeling like people don't see you. You can have these underlying emotions, and something that
Yeah.
can be really helpful for that is, to validate that experience.
Mhm.
So that's why that being aware of the emotional piece is so important.
I like to talk about our emotions like messengers. Every emotion we have has a specific message. And I think all the time there are certain emotions that like get a bad rap. We're so used to talking about anxiety and just right off the bat equating it with, and that's a problem. And I think it's really important for people to know and to recognize like anxiety is a valid emotion to experience. It is not always indicative of a problem. If we think about the larger emotional family, if you will, it's a fear-based emotion. And again, very often we can hear things like, don't live your life from fear. And, but we have fear for a reason. We have anxiety for a reason. And so, to your point, being able to get really curious about the anxiety, sometimes, as you were saying, it's really obvious. We're actively thinking about or worrying about something specific. And sometimes it takes a little more effort and time to pin that down. But as you were saying, like to be able to really put language around and articulate, what am I anxious about? And I have people even just like make a list if it's a couple of different things, recognizing that anxiety is a valid experience and emotion, and it is bringing us a message sometimes. There are times where we might put things down on that list and say, oh, like my anxiety makes sense. My anxiety is signaling to me this is maybe not a healthy situation for me to be walking into. Or this is a situation that I need to think about what my boundaries are going to be. I'm doing a lot of these conversations with, a lot of people that I work with right now. How do you set boundaries? And, this anticipatory anxiety, it's like these alarms going off, going, hey, danger ahead. Now, danger is subjective and it may be kind of a little d or a big D, but look at it in that starting point of saying, like, could this be an accurate message to me that there are some things that are coming up that I need to attend to? And so I think when we kind of take that approach, number one, it changes our relationship to anxiety, right? It's not a problem that needs to be gotten rid of or solved. Sometimes it's our biggest ally. I suggest people like write them down and make a list. And because from that place, we can discern, okay, well, is this something where it's more of like, can I respond to this anxiety with mindfulness and validation and not necessarily do anything about the situation, but focus on my relationship to what's coming up? Other times it may be, well, let me actually do some coping ahead and some planning ahead for how I take care of myself or set boundaries. And there might be some really active problem solving that can really help to say to that anxiety, hey, I'm hearing your message and I'm doing something about it. With our emotions, when they hear the message, usually that's when we start to feel it dissipate because it's like, cool, you got the message. I can step back now. Anxiety is not always a problem to be solved or something to be gotten rid of, but really can be giving us some helpful and accurate information about our circumstances or experiences to come.
That's so true. The validation piece can be so helpful because that's what you're doing is you are telling yourself that, my anxiety is okay. This is an okay reaction. For me recently, I had a lot of anxiety about taking my dog to the vet. And,
Yes,
it's just,
right.
it takes over your whole body and you have all this anxiety. And my first reaction was, stop it, that you're making a big deal. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Why don't you just stop being anxious? But then when I kind of wake up to myself and say, I'm going to validate myself, I'm going to say to myself that it's understandable I'm having this anxiety because I really love and care for my dog. And then what happens is I experience the stressor in a
Uh-huh.
little bit different way instead of it just being this like so much pressure and so hard to take, it shifts into more of a little bit of a sadness or a bit of a, I'm really hoping, yearning, which is better on the body, right? If you're just kind of sitting with yearning and that sadness, you're not putting so much stress on your nervous system, which puts stress on your cardiovascular system. I mean, there's all kinds of research out there that shows that that's really unhealthy for your body, not to mention just uncomfortable for your whole experience.
I so often think about validation as, of course, I'm feeling anxious taking my beloved dog to the vet. Mindfulness is acceptance of what is, and even if that's acceptance of anxiety in the moment. And then validation of this, of course, with validation, we can experience a kind of settling of an experience, of an emotional experience. Again, it's like those emotions being messengers going, oh, you see me. Okay, thanks. And so there can be a settling, and not to say it goes away, but it feels different to turn towards it, to validate it, versus when we're trying to talk ourselves out of it or ignore it, or all the different ways that we can react to our emotions. And early in our conversation, we were talking about the difference between stress and a stressor. When we acknowledge the stressor, we acknowledge, and can validate the impact it's having us, then we allow our system to move that whole stress cycle, like move that process more completely through our system when we allow it to be there as it is.
There are some awarenesses that can be helpful to move us through this experience in a more healthy way. The ones that Reese and I are going to talk about today are acceptance and boundary setting. The really tricky part here is trying to understand and decide which to use in which situation. When do we just move into acceptance and just say, yep, this is how it is, this is how things roll with this group of people? Or when is it the right time to set a boundary and say, it's not good for me to participate in this. I'm going to sit this one out, as just an example.
This is one of my favorite questions, actually, favorite things to talk about. How I think about acceptance is that it is a willingness to radically, and when I use that word radically, I just mean totally and completely, all the way, accept reality and a situation or circumstances as they are, rather than how we want them to be. This radical willingness to accept life on life's terms, situations as they are, rather than what we think they should be or what we want them to be. What it's not is passive. It doesn't mean we throw our hands up and then say, well, I'm not going to do anything different. It's also not letting people off the hook. Instead, it's saying, okay, this is as it is. My family is as they are. That is always going to be the necessary starting point. And then from there are always going to be three options that we have. The first option is that we can do something to change the situation. And this is where we can talk about setting boundaries, doing something to change the situation. The second thing is changing our relationship to the situation, our thoughts, our feelings, our perspective around it. And then the third thing is we can tolerate the situation the best that we can. Now, those three things are not mutually exclusive. We can, sometimes do a combination of two, sometimes even a combination of three. But with setting boundaries or solving a problem or changing it in some kind of way, the people who accept a situation more quickly are going to get to a solution more quickly. Mm-hmm. Because very often we can get stuck in this place where we're saying, well, they should just be different. We can hang out in this place where we're resentful or anxious or frustrated and say, oh, it should be different. But the sooner we get to a place of accepting other people or situations as they are, rather than what we think it should be, we can then say, okay, now what does that mean for me? What do I do to take care of myself?
Yes. That is key, because acceptance does not mean that we agree with what's happening. Yes. It means we accept that it is happening. Mm-hmm. And that's such an important distinction. And that is so rooted in the School of Mindfulness. All the mindfulness teachers talk about that. I love these three options, change the situation, change the relationship with the situation, and or just kind of tolerate the situation. And I think some of the things that could be helpful with changing our relationship with the situation are some acceptance in what's going on in our experience, in our internal experience. So accepting of our own emotions, accepting that, this is bringing up difficulty, accepting the body sensations that are coming up. This nervous system trigger could be moving up all the way to your chest, and accepting, yes, in this moment, I can feel my nervous system trigger, and I can feel it because my heart rate is higher. And I think this acknowledging difficulty is so helpful for me for changing the relationship with the situation. And that's simply just saying things like to yourself, mostly. I do it, say it to myself. But if you can talk to people you can trust to talk to about this too, simply saying this behavior is difficult for me to be around. Traveling to another state is difficult on my system. When you can admit to yourself that this is difficult, the next step that's hopefully natural is to be kind to yourself. Because a lot of times when we are met with difficulty, then we show up for ourselves in an unkind way.
For so many people, they come to a place of recognizing the amount of time that they spend with family sometimes makes a really big difference as far as how they can go through the holidays feeling healthier within themselves. Also thinking about scheduling. We might feel really tempted to say yes to everything, and the holidays become more stressful than celebratory. Being really thoughtful and intentional about scheduling. For me, I can get really overstimulated. I need to build in time for quiet and for things to be less stimulating. It could be I need to make sure that I get up and I go for a walk, carving out ways of taking care of yourself. There could also be boundaries around conversations. What kinds of things are talked about? What kinds of things are not talked about? So those are some of the things that come to my mind.
I have found that when it comes to setting boundaries, doing some work around it with yourself or with a coach or with a therapist first can just be so helpful. And some of the things that I talk to my clients about to help them set up these boundaries is really being clear about, if it's about conversations, what is okay for people to say to you and what is not okay. And then the third component is the consequence, meaning that if the thing happens that's not okay, then what are you going to do? Are you going to hang up the phone? Are you going to leave temporarily? What is your plan if that gets broken? And so if you're really clear about those three pieces to the boundary setting beforehand, then when you walk into the situation, you can really be calm and cool about it. And my clients have had some huge success stating, this is hard for me when you speak to me this way, and I'm asking you to not speak to me this way. It's really developed some deeper connections with their family members.
Very often, I think when setting boundaries, people get really focused on how to get somebody else to change their behavior. Now, that is fair game. And we need to be able to communicate with other people in a way that we clearly, if something's not working for us, that we clearly ask them to do it differently. But there are times where we may find ourselves where somebody isn't willing, or it's a difficult relationship, or even when it's not. I think it's really important to be clear about, exactly as you're saying, the if then. If this happens, then I'm going to do X, because ultimately that's such a more empowering stance versus putting all of our eggs in the basket of like the other person's got to change, right? It's so much more empowering to know, like, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. Whether we communicate that to the other person or we're just prepared for it ourselves, again, it creates so much more of an empowered stance in those kinds of situations.
Well, Brees, I really appreciate our conversation today, and I'm sure our listeners are going to find great value in all that you've offered. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your practice and your coaching and how people can get a hold of you.
My website is livingbalanceavl, like Asheville.com. I see clients almost all over the country. And as you said, I work with people with anxiety, eating disorders or disordered eating, OCD as well. And then in my coaching practice, I love working with high achieving, high functioning women, especially people who are just incredibly capable in their lives. That on the one hand can be a superpower. And yet at the same time, it can end up creating an experience where we feel like we're just on a hamster wheel all the time of trying to keep up or thinking about kind of what's the next achievement, what's the next project, what's the next thing, live a more values-driven and purposeful life.
Thanks so much, Brees. I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
The Aware Mind podcast is a TSD Mindfulness production. Please check out our show notes for upcoming events and links to additional resources. Please visit our website at tsdmind.org. That is T as in tame, S as in soothe, D as in dwell, mind as in mindfulness.org. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at TSD_mindfulness.